Jasmine, what would make this an extraordinary conversation for you?
So right now, like I'm really struggling with logistic questions. For some reason, when I get to things that involve like more 3D dimensional stuff, it gets like really confusing for me to kind of keep track and stay organized. So I'm wondering if you have any tips in terms of, especially with online and digital stuff, how I can organize my thoughts better when it comes to 3D games.
Okay, well, for game types, drilling. So you figure out which game types are giving you trouble. You do several of those games in a row so you can start to see the commonalities between them. You can also, of course, look at explanations to help you clear things up if you have some confusion. But overall, you want to redo the games that give you trouble so that you can better master them. It's that simple. I mean, how many games have you done up to this point?
Um, well, I haven't, like, I've kind of set the book aside for a little bit, but I've done about like 20 of them. And I find that a lot of times when it involves like J's or like, I don't know, it's like super weird for me because like when it comes to names, like for some reason I can really like organize those really well. But when it comes to stuff dealing with like putting things in boxes and leaving things like in and outs, then those always kind of confuse me because I'm trying to figure out, okay, so this is the group that can go with this group. And then also there's that whole in and out category of these people can be in this group, but it's exclusive to these people only. And other people can't, you know, like it's just like that whole thing kind of gets confusing.
Yeah. Yeah. The in-out games are certainly one of the harder game types, but games are, as a whole, they are quite perfectible if you do a lot of them. And you said you've done 20 games.
Yeah, not a lot, like not a lot. Like I guess maybe I should try to organize better. I find it's also very difficult in terms of like time because once I get the organization down with like the 1D games and everything, I find that I'm spending way too much time like focusing on one question and then trying to answer like all of them. So I'm wondering like also when it comes to really trying to be more efficient, like how I can do that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, to me, the problem is pretty clear. It's that you've only done 20 games. And there's something that's understandable. I mean, games are hard and the LSAT's hard and you said you've put it aside and maybe you haven't made it a priority yet. But when you do make it a priority, you'll be doing far more games than that. There are nearly 100 released exams, 88 of which are currently numbered. So you've got nearly 400 games that you could do.
Exactly, yeah.
So there's a lot out there. And once you do, even if you do 40 games, you'll have exposed yourself to a much wider variety of what there is. And you'll start to see things repeat. And once you see them repeat, then you see that there is an underlying logic to it. Now, let me ask you a random question. Have you ever done yoga?
I have done yoga like once or twice though, not like a lot.
That's the thing. So I recently got into yoga a few years ago and I bought like a 10-pack of classes and I did like one class and I hated it because it didn't make any sense to me. It's like a bunch of random poses I had never done before, but I had this 10-pack and I was like, I might as well use it. The place is around the corner. And I started just going every couple of days. And by class number 5, I started to get a sense of what it was like. And then by class number 10, I was hooked because I saw there's a rhythm and a pattern to it. And the same is true of the LSAT. Like if you do a random exam of 4 that contains one section of 4 games, then you're like, these are just 4 random games and they're puzzles and they're really difficult. Like only someone who like went to math camp, or like a nerd camp sort of thing, would ever understand what that was like. But if you do 40 games organized by type, if you do like a half dozen ordering, a half dozen grouping, some combination games, curveball games, then you redo the ordering and grouping games. Then you'll see, okay, well, when I see an ordering game, this is what a diagram will often look like. Or grouping in-out diagram, this is what that will often look like. So I think you just need to expose yourself to a whole lot more of them.
Yeah. And do you recommend Power Score and those kinds of textbooks, like self-teaching more than like Khan Academy and Princeton? Like, what would you say is the most efficient way to like learn how to do these questions?
Well, I have my own system, so I'm a little bit biased and I'll recommend that. But overall, I think you want to avoid too much categorization. And the Khan Academy, I think it's a great source of practice tests, but it's not really a cohesive system. It's like a bunch of exams they got from LSAC and then a bunch of explanations. And yeah, it's free, so why not use it? But my concern, honestly, is that somebody would use that and then feel like they're ready for the exam when there's really so much more to do with this. And so the system I lay out basically has you do ordering games, then grouping, then combination. But within those, I'll have you do the easiest ordering, then the intermediate ordering, then difficult. So easy to difficult within each category so that you can see the patterns and you're not giving yourself anything too difficult too early in the process.
That makes sense. Yeah. And how often do you recommend like diving into these studies, like every single day? Like how many hours should you dedicate to studying for the LSAT each week, each day potentially, or each month?
Well, when are you taking the exam?
Well, I'm looking to take it like a year from now. I'm still in third year, so I'm thinking of just completing my degree, maybe taking a year off, so not for a while, but I still want to get the practice in very early so that I can get accustomed to the material.
Good. So you have a long timeline. So I think you certainly don't need to study every single day.
Okay.
Over the course of an entire year, that would be a bit much. And obviously, it's not realistic because you have the holidays and you have family, and you'll
Yeah.
presumably have more pressing concerns in the short term.
Mhm.
But I would say do something every week, a little something. Overall, as it gets closer, though, you want to increase the amount of studying that you do so that you're doing, ideally, if you have work or school, you're devoting 10 to 15 hours per week to your LSAT prep. So you're treating it like a part time job or a 6 credit class in university. So you're taking it fairly seriously. And maybe more on the weekends, less during the week, but definitely block off time in your schedule for it to make sure it happens. And get your hands on some of these books of actual exams. You can get most of them in books of 10 on Amazon.
Really? And how much would they like on average cost? Is it like $10 or so or like 50?
Somewhere in the middle. It's about $20 USD for one book of 10 exams.
Okay.
And most of them are available in these books. And so get your hands on the most recent couple. I would say for you, you might want to get everything from 42 to present. They're all numbered. So exam 42 up to the exams in the 80s. And you could gradually work through them from older to newer over the course of a year. I mean, if you're really committed and you really want to top score, I would say get every single exam, especially just so you can work on those games because they are the most perfectible section and you want to give yourself all the prep material that you could possibly want or need.
Do you have any advice in terms of what you've seen really help students like with success, specifically students that learn well through like visually seeing something? Like I know I'm a visual learner. So for me, like I'd either have to be very like I'd have to see something and really be able to kind of just like put things together um, a certain way. I know I don't learn very well auditorially or like with hands-on. So I'm wondering like how like if you have any tips for people that learn visually.
Well, you might like to use videos to study then. Like I have video courses. There are plenty of other videos out there as well. But if you find video more engaging and you actually see someone talking, which will capture your interest more, you'll see diagrams being drawn out for you, especially for games, you might find that helpful. So I'd suggest that rather than a book. Some of these books, they're hundreds or thousands of pages long and that can get kind of heavy to deal with, you know? So maybe you'd prefer video to study, but yeah, try out some different materials and see what you find to be most engaging.
Yeah, of course. And when it comes to, and I just kind of remembered the question that I had before, related to the digital LSAT now, because things are a little bit different in terms of studying through writing pen and paper and actually going to the exam. So when you go into the exam, from what heard from someone, is that there's like a certain section where you're like given like a little stylus and you're able to kind of like flip through, but that wastes a lot of time and a lot of energy to kind of like highlight and use like the tools on that tablet because you're only given one of them. So what tips do you recommend when like you go into the exam and you're not really able to write, you're only allowed to like underline or you're constricted to whatever tools that they have or provide for you there?
Yeah, I would say use the scratch paper.
Use the scratch
You
paper.
cannot draw on the tablet itself with the stylus. You can only use, as you said, the highlighting and underlining tools, which frankly don't work that great. So
Yeah.
I wouldn't even try to use them. I would say use your finger because you can count on that much more than the stylus and just do your work on pen, on the scratch paper, do all your diagramming there, do all your little note taking there, but that's it. And
Yeah.
when you're studying, treat your books like a screen where you don't write on your books either. You just do your work to the side.
Okay, that's going to be difficult because again, with the whole visual learning and stuff, like what I was doing before with reading comp, because I've looked a little bit more into that, is that I would do like if there's a premise that I thought was extremely relevant, like I would do P and circle it. And then I would do like little brackets for the conclusion to try to find a main argument. But I was just thinking like I can't really do those things when I'm going to the LSAT and I don't like highlighting because I feel like once I highlight, that's stuck in my brain for every other question that's on that list as well. So it just messes me up. So when it goes to all of these different things and all of these gadgets, how do you recommend really getting the main conclusion in? Do you recommend like just writing one small sentence with like several words on like a scrap piece of paper and saying, this is my main conclusion? Or what do you recommend?
Yeah, I know what you mean. Because I used to like bracketing too. And unfortunately, you can't do that on digital anymore. So I'd suggest again, remember that you're just getting started with this. You have a whole year or more to study. So whatever digital adjustments you need to make, you'll have time to implement those. I don't want you to wait too long, of course, because I don't want habits to become ingrained that you're later going to want to unlearn. But remember that you're going to have a year to study and gain some familiarity with logical reasoning, separating conclusion from evidence. So for now, if you want to note what's conclusion, what's evidence with brackets, that's fine. But you're not always going to need to do that, even though you might feel the need right now. There will be certain keywords that start to jump out at you, indicating evidence or conclusion. And even in the absence of those keywords, you will eventually come to recognize them and it will become automatic for you. Mm-hmm. So I think ultimately in the long term, it won't be a huge concern. Overall though, like with reading comp, you might want to make some brief notes in the scratch paper, but for most of logical reasoning, you're not going to need to write down anything at all.
Right. I know. It's just like there's a lot of pressure, I guess, with like the LSAT and everything and trying to get into law school. Like it just gets so nerve-wracking talking about it because you're like, oh my gosh, like this whole digital LSAT is such like a throw off because you study a certain way. And, you know, if you grab books or you try to use sources such as online classes and stuff, they teach you a specific way of doing things that no longer are relevant because of the way that it's changed and everything. So I think that there's like a lot of like uncertainty right now on like the performance that people have in terms of the digital LSAT, from what I've heard anyways, and kind of like how that's going to play a factor in scoring and how, you know, these habits are going to really hinder us instead of, you know, help us.
Yeah. So. I mean, it's a mix. It's both good and bad. I mean, you've mentioned a lot of the negatives, which I certainly agree with. There are a few small positives though. One of them is that the countdown timer being on the tablet means that there's no room for proctor error when it comes to timing you anymore.
Oh, that's nice.
And they can't possibly forget to give you the 5-minute warning per section because that's also built into the tablet. You can also flag questions within the tablet to easily come back to later. And you can bubble in with one tap rather than slowly filling in an oval with a number 2 pencil. So those are all good things. And as you said, yeah, you do need to adjust your techniques though. And you want to be using prep materials that are specific to the digital format. I completely redesigned my courses last year specifically for the digital LSAT. I revamped everything because this is a massive change. I mean, everyone in North America is doing digital now. And so whatever prep materials you choose, you want to make sure they're completely updated for the digital. So I'm glad that you're aware of this.
Yeah, it's just, it must be nerve-wracking for you as well because you're trying to keep up with the times and just trying to structure things in a way that works for students. So I couldn't imagine like what, you know, all these other guys are trying to do in terms of trying to get these resources for other students and trying to get them to study a certain way when, you know, we're so wired to, I don't know, for myself anyways, pen and paper.
Yeah, no, it's definitely an adjustment. I mean, you're right about it. The nice thing is that LSAC gave us plenty of notice. So I've been working over the past year really to change everything up for digital. And LSAC does have some tech issues with the tablets and stuff that they're slowly figuring out. But the nice thing for you is that because your timeline's a bit farther off, then there will be more prep materials out there specific to digital, and LSAC will hopefully have worked out all the kinks by the time you take it.
Yeah, hopefully. Oh my goodness. Cross those fingers, right?
Yeah, well, you've got plenty of time though.
Yeah. Do you have any advice for someone that's trying to go into third year? Because I know like it must not be that different than America, like in Canada or whatever, but for us in third year, there's a lot of pressure right now that we have from, I don't know, peers to be like, you have to get like A+ in like your courses. You have to do all of these different things like extracurriculars, get an internship, all of that, and study for this LSAT. Like, when do you think is like the best time to really, I guess, get your shit together is essentially what I'm trying to say here, trying to get the best marks. Is it fourth year that really counts or is it third year? And when are we really good to take the LSAT? Because I heard from people that taking it in third year or taking it in fourth year isn't the best time because either we're not wired for that yet or there's just too much going on and we can't really keep up or something.
The best time to take it is whenever you're ready and you've had a good amount of time to study prior. Yeah. I mean, LSAT scores are good for 5 years. And as for wiring, that doesn't hold a lot of water with me. I think that there's nothing you're learning in university that's that relevant to the LSAT other than being able to read critically and think well and all that sort, and analytically and all of that. So some people will study over winter break and take it in the spring. Others will study over the summer and take it in the fall. So it's whenever you have the most time, or you could take a lighter course load one semester to allow you to have time to study for the LSAT as well simultaneously. So it really depends upon your personal schedule, but I don't think there's any particular time that's ideally overall. except I would say earlier is better because then you have time to retake it if you need to.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. I heard from someone, and I don't know if this is true, that there's actually going to be a limit moving forward with the LSAT and how many times you can take it. I know that they keep a cumulative average of your LSAT scores, and they keep into account the other times that you've taken it. For example, if you keep taking the LSAT and you get like lower scores or whatever, that could potentially affect the way that a law school admission panel may be like evaluating you as a student. But in terms of limitations on how much you can take the LSAT, I believe that it's changed to 8 times, and I'm not sure if that's correct. Well,
So there are some new limits that went into effect this year. It's now you can take it 3 times in one admission cycle, which runs from June to May.
Oh, so it's only like a year. So even then, like that's a lot of money.
Yeah, if you were to take it 3 times, that's like 600 USD. So that's a good amount of money, but people spend it. Though some get fee waivers as well to make it more affordable based on financial need. But 3 times in 1 year, 5 times in 5 years, and 7 times for life. And if you get a 180, you can't take it again. So those are the limits. But I don't think they affect less than 1% of test takers, honestly. It's not a huge concern. Of course, it's better to take it once and be done and have a great score than to take it multiple times. It's better to take it a few times with increasing scores than a few times with decreasing scores, relatively speaking. But at least in the US, virtually all law schools take the highest score. They do not average multiple scores. They might say that they consider multiple, but in practice, at least in the US, the highest is what matters because that's what goes into the US news rankings. The Canadian example might be a little bit different. Maybe they consider multiple. I'm not too sure on the specifics of that.
I heard from a couple people, like several lawyers, that they do keep a little bit of a cumulative average. Like they'll take into account your most recent score from what I hear, but they will also be able to see, like if you got, for example, like a 160 and you were to take it again and got like a 167, they could see the 160. And I think that they could be like, okay, we're going to maybe, like they're not going to like average it out 50-50, but I think that they take into consideration the fact that you already took it and that you got a lower score, and they have to ask themselves like why that happened. And you could explain that like in like, I guess like a paper or something. But I think that like for us, I think that they look at the cumulative. I know they do that for GPAs sometimes. If you're trying to get into like U of T or OSGA, I think that they take like a cumulative average as well as the GPAs for the first or the last 2 years. But I'm not 100% sure on that one. So yeah.
Well, I would talk to admissions.
Yeah.
But of course, if you take it and then get a higher score later, that's obviously a good thing to have done. There's no question that it was worth retaking if you got 7 points higher on the second take.
Right. So what would you say is like, I guess this is very subjective too, but like a good average for scoring in the LSAT? Would it be like 160 range, or like what do you recommend?
Well, the median LSAT score is a 151. That's just the median though. If you want to go to a top school in the US, like let's say that there's the top 14 in the US, then I would say anything above 166, like 167 and above, is a great score to have. A good score, in my opinion, is anything 160 and above.
Right. So would you recommend then taking the LSAT again? Like if you didn't get like a 160, if you got like a 155, would it be worth it?
I would say so, certainly. I mean, even just getting 1 point more on the LSAT could lead to getting into a better law school or getting more scholarship money. And so it's well worth attempting. I mean, just a point or two more makes a huge difference. And through luck alone, you might do a few points better. And then if you study on top of that for a retake, then you could do even better than that. So there's really, to me, there's no reason not to retake if you've only taken it once, because luck alone, you could do better.
Of course. And in terms of like experiences too, like outside of the LSAT, and I know this is like one of those like kind of vague questions, but is there anything that someone can do or a candidate can do to really boost up their kind of appeal to law schools? Like, can they like do like a certain job, or like can they do some volunteer work which could help boost them or give them some kind of like uniqueness from like other competitors?
Primarily, they're going to care about your LSAT score and your GPA. And so I would focus on those. You said you're still in university, so definitely keep that GPA up. If you are interested in and want to do things like internships and work experience and volunteering, that's all great. And if it's related to the law in some way, that's even better. But I wouldn't do things just for law school admissions purposes. It's not a way to structure your life, and it's not going to make such an enormous difference that it's worth it. I mean, there are people who study, who do nothing but study for the LSAT, and that ends up being worth it. I mean, you want to have something else to talk about on your application, of course, but the time invested in your LSAT and GPA is really the best way to spend it overall.
Yeah. So that makes a lot of sense. What else do I have about the LSAT? Sorry, I guess I'm kind of like rough because I'm not used to being like recorded and on camera. So
No, it's all good. Whatever comes to mind.
I know that I've had a little bit of luck with like the Power Score books, and that's kind of helped me a bit. But I find a lot of times, like as like a university student who's studying full time, that it's a little bit of like a burnout for me. Even just kind of like doing like the 10 questions or so, sometimes it takes me like 30 to 45 minutes, and I'm sitting there like, wow, like this is a lot of information. Like this is really overwhelming. So I'm kind of wondering, like, is there any way to help with burnout or any strategies that can maybe help students like work more efficiently, but also at the same time absorb the information that they need to, to kind of get the most out of their studying time?
Yeah, well, take breaks. Taking breaks is incredibly important. It is a lot, and those books, they do tend to over categorize quite a bit. And so I wouldn't get too focused on memorizing all the various details and subcategories of different question types. Just focus on getting the big picture as you walk away from it. Don't try to memorize everything you see. This is really a test more of pattern recognition. So if you see something in theory in the books and then seeing the application on the actual questions, that's really the most important takeaway. What would you say is the biggest insight you got from our call today?
Well, just kind of like basically hearing like the rundown of like what's going on, especially with digital LSAT. It's really good to hear that you have materials that are accessible that I could potentially tap into to try and, study for this thing and really get familiar with how the format's going to be like.
Great. Well, please keep in touch and let me know if you need anything as you move forward.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for tuning into the show. Please subscribe if you haven't done so already to be notified of new episodes as I release them. And feel free to reach out if you need anything at all as you move forward with your prep. I'm happy to help however I can. In the meantime, I'll wish you all the best and take care.